Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Let's Talk, my show where we talk about interesting topics. And sometimes it's controversial, sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's topics that you guys send in. Well, today I was on this gentleman's YouTube channel, Chris Wyatt, Colonel Chris Wyatt. You can see him there right next to me. And we were chatting, and then the whole topic of Space Force came up, and I was like, you know what, let's get on my channel and let's talk about that. So we're going to talk about the Space Force because I'm not convinced that we need it. But like I said, this guy, Chris Wyatt, is a man that's been on in the military for 36 years. He's retired now. Or am I correct? He's retired now.
That's that's correct. I
Yeah.
retired October of 2019.
Yeah. So he knows a lot about not just about the army, but also he was stationed in Africa for most of his career, so he knows a lot about Africa as well. But let's see what he thinks. Chris, say hi. Give us a bit of a background about yourself for those of us who don't know who you are, and then we'll get into the questions.
Sure, Joe. Thanks for having me on. I guess payback's a bear. I mean, I got to pay back since I got you on my show.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess this is the price of admission. No, no, I don't mind. Anyway, but seriously, yeah. So I'm a retired U.S. Army colonel. I retired October of 2019. I served 36 and a half years in uniform, 34 of those on active duty, with 2 years in between. When I was at university, I went in the Ohio National Guard. So I served three tours in Germany, one in Italy, of course, the first Gulf War, Iraq, Bosnia, Kosovo, in the Balkans. And then in Africa, I served tours in Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Niger, Mauritania, Uganda, and Ethiopia. And the last one I worked with the African Union in Addis Ababa. And I did peacekeeping, counterterrorism, professional military education, development, built schools, clinics, hospitals, things like that, roads and wells on occasion. Also had HIV programs, Ebola vaccine programs, tuberculosis programs, malaria programs. So I've done all those things. Pretty cool. I taught at undergraduate level at Iowa State University for a couple of years. I taught postgraduate at the Army War College, which was my last job in the Army, which I just finished up a few months ago. I was the director of African Studies at the U.S. Army War College, which is a master's degree granting institution here in the U.S. And I worked at the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, U.S. Africa Command. Maybe I should stop there. That's enough.
I'm smiling about the national security thing because now everyone's like, "Ooh, tell us more." Ice ZA is here. Thanks, Ice, for tuning in. Who says, "Hey, Chris and Joe. Hey, thank you so much for tuning in, Ice ZA." All right, cool. So let's start from the get go. What's his name? President Trump recently unveiled the flag of the United States Space Force. I don't like the flag. I mean, it's kind of cool, but it's not. I mean, the whole. I don't like that it looks like Star Trek. That's my opinion. I don't like Star Trek. I'm a Star Wars fan. I don't know. How do you feel about the flag?
Confused you are, I see. Puzzled you are, I see. Patience, young Joe, patience. No, listen, Star Wars, it delivered all it had in the 70s and early 80s. It's been nothing but a joke since then.
Oh,
Sorry. No,
yeah.
I'm just
Well,
kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, listen, come on. I mean, Wagon Train to the Stars, Gene Roddenberry. This is the original stuff, man. Come on. This flag rocks. It is awesome. I've already ordered a dozen of them to put up poles in my front yard and fly them.
yeah. I guess like a hardcore Trekkie would be foaming at the mouth with excitement. But I can't help but think about that every time I look at it. Beam me up, Scotty. And what do you? Okay, so do you know anything, or rather, should I ask? What is your opinion on the Space Force? See, what I've heard about people talking about the Space Force is that it's wasted money, that we don't need it, that we're spending money that that America can't afford on this project. What's your take on that?
All right, but before I answer it, I have to ask you a question since you're dissing on Star Trek. And I'm not a Trekkie, by the way. I do enjoy a good program, but You're dissing Star Trek. Are you going to throw away your mobile phones? Are you going to stop using portable medical diagnostic devices? Are you going to come on? These are all from Star Trek, man. They had it long before we actually had it. Anyway,
Yeah, no.
all right. So U.S. Space Force is something that's long overdue, from my perspective. In my view, this is something that the U.S. should have done a couple decades ago.
Interesting.
There is a genuine need for this, and in fact, the Air Force had a section of the Air Force that was responsible for space before this. They created back in 1982. It's been around since then, and it was part of U.S. Air Force. Now, we had something called Space Command. It
Mm-hmm.
actually was an existing command. It was called U.S. Space Command. But when President Bush created Africa Command and Northern Command, actually the creation of Northern Command, which represents the geographic space of North America and part of the Caribbean Basin, so Mexico, U.S., Canada, Virgin Islands, Bahamas, stuff like that. When that command was created, Northern Command, Space Command disappeared. They eliminated it. We no longer had it. And the functions that Space Command did for doctrine, for space-based operations, and for terrestrial support for that was all transferred to the existing Air Force subcommand. So all of that went there. But Space Command was a joint or multi-service unified command. So all the services contributed personnel, civilians, and military to it. So when that went away under the Bush administration, the Air Force, it all fell on them. Nothing wrong with that, except that from my perspective, someone has to have vision. When Kennedy said we choose to go to space not because what did he say? We have to, but because we can, or something like that. He was trying to inspire people, and he did. And we got to the moon in 1969 within a decade. That was his dream. Of course, he didn't live to see it, but that was his dream. I think that history will judge Donald Trump very well on the prescient decision to create a space force because it's necessary. So much of what we rely on is tied to space, and people have no idea. The fact that you and I are talking right now is only possible because of the GPS global positioning system that's in space, which was designed for the military so we could deliver munitions on target and also so we could navigate properly. But the fact that we have mobile telephony is a result of GPS. Otherwise, it wouldn't be nearly as effective. We'd have latency and other issues. The Chinese in 2007 famously used an anti-satellite missile to blow up a satellite in space, creating about 150,000 pieces of space debris,
Yeah.
which some of that came within 6 kilometers of the International Space Station a few years ago, endangering the International Space Station. Of course, something as small as,
Yeah.
a coin this size could rip a hole in that and kill people or cause it to fall out of the sky. But they're not the first. The U.S. has previously done 2 anti-satellite missiles in the past we fired into space. So whether we want to have a space force or not, people are putting space-based capabilities into the geostrategic mix. And so it's, in my view, long overdue, and I think that Trump is very prescient. While I may take issue with some of the things that my president does, not on this one. I'm all on board. And I love the Star Trek Delta Wing logo, too, on the flag.
All right, so we got some people saying hi. Russell Fox, who's a fellow performer and magician slash illusionist.
Yeah.
And he is actually going to be on my show tomorrow, so come and check that out. He says, hey, brother Russ here, enjoying the show. Thank you so much, Russell, for tuning in. And we have Bradley Cook saying hi all. Hello, Bradley, who's also wearing a camouflage hat. Looks like it's on his profile pic, so he's probably a fan of the Army. Okay, cool. So you said a few things there that kind of pricked my ears a bit. So okay, let's. I think you said so. There was a space command which eventually went away. So what exactly did the space command investigate? Like was it part of Roswell? Is that why the space command suddenly came out, or there was a
No,
need to
no.
explore space?
No, well, it's not for exploration. That's what NASA's for. NASA's for space exploration, not the Space Force. That won't be their mission. I don't know if we're going to see, people think of Space Force, they're probably thinking of aliens and Hudson. I don't know if you're keeping score, man, but we just got our asses kicked. Absolutely one of the single best lines in a movie
Yeah.
ever. I love that movie. As they're riding around their super cool urban assault vehicle. That was awesome. Banging against the walls, trying to get away from the aliens as they clamber up. Yeah, no, maybe one day they'll have Space Marines, but that's certainly not. By the way, those were private company Space Marines, kind of like Executive Outcomes. They weren't really they weren't government, but yeah. So that may be the future, but the present for today is existing capabilities that already are the mission that's being done. So, for instance, the GPS satellite system that you and I use for free, the U.S. Department of Defense maintains and pays for that, and pays to put the satellites up there and keeps them in operation. Has ground-based operation centers that keep that system working, and the world wouldn't function, the modern world, without it. So the world should thank
Hmm.
my military, our military, for that. But yeah, so that alone is a function that requires some sort of space command that's responsible for organizing that, because the military runs that. Even though it's used overwhelmingly these days for civilian purposes, it's run by the military. But beyond that, some of the other things I talked about is we have other space-based capabilities, and someone has to be responsible for the doctrine on how to develop it, how to employ it, how to use it. If it requires public law changes or international agreements, there needs to be somebody that writes the things that are necessary, the papers and the doctrine for that, and then puts that forward for either our government or international governments for the discussions. So, of course, I can neither confirm or deny that we have space-based intelligence assets, but you can guess what the answer on that might be. And if such things existed, a command like this would be responsible for coordinating them. Now, there's an important distinction here, too.
You just gave such a colonel answer to that, like you're in the media press. I can neither confirm or deny.
Right.
That is
It's a true
brilliant.
statement. I can either. No, it's no. I've lost my train of thought, man. I lost my train of thought.
Sorry, but I think
That's
what
right.
you were trying to address is the part where I said the whole, like, okay, I'm gonna just come out and say, I want to know, is the Space Force going to be part of protecting us from aliens? Is it going to be part of protecting us from an unknown threat in the future? Is it going to be like this big army that we see in in future? Like, are we looking at Enterprise spaceships in the future? Is that where you think that's headed? Is this the beginning of that?
In 30 or 40 years, perhaps. But for now, what it is it's taking the existing 16,000 Air Force personnel who work in space operations
Mm-hmm.
and putting them under this command. So they will transfer. So this U.S. Space Force is a new military service. So we have the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard too. But in peacetime, they belong to the Department of Homeland Security. But when we're activated for wartime, then they fall under the Department of Defense. But anyway, so you have those. Now, the chief, the odd thing about this is that now the Secretary of the Air Force has become a more powerful person in theory, because not only is the Secretary of the Air Force responsible for the U.S. Air Force, but they're also responsible for the U.S. Space Force. So that Secretary of the Air Force at the Pentagon now has two forces at his disposal. But we should make something clear here. This is a unified command. It's not a combatant command. The distinction being that the combatant commands are geographic based, and anytime that we fight a conflict or we do disaster response or we do engagement with partners, it's done through a combatant command. That doesn't mean the troops come from there. So, for instance, for example, Southcom and AFRICOM don't have any organic combat troops, ships, planes, things like that. So whenever there's a mission that needs to be done in the AFRICOM area responsibility, which is all of Africa except for Egypt, and in Latin America for Southcom, they have to go back to the Joint Staff of the Pentagon and say, we need, an infantry battalion, or we need a cruiser, or we need a submarine, or we need this. They don't ask for that asset. They say, this is the mission, and then the planners say, this is what you get. And so they create a joint force of different services. So that's what this command will do. So, for instance, if European Command needs some sort of space-based capability, say, I don't know, and like again, I could neither confirm or deny something that's tied to putting intelligence assets in space, or just needs, some help on working with partners about how they're going about space, they would turn to the Space Command, which would provide the expertise through staffing and its own operations and intelligence staff, and or personnel. They would send them short-term, long-term, deploy them to a location. So that's kind of how it works. Now we have other commands like that. We have Transcom, which is a transportation command, but they actually have physical assets. They're at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. They actually own, control planes. They gather them, fly people and supplies all over the world. But we have other functional commands too. So this would be one of the functional commands. So they're not going to have Space Marines or cruisers in space or something like that. Certainly not in the near future. But if the U.S. hangs around and survives into the next century, I fully would imagine that we'd have space-based travel, and we would have military personnel wearing a really cool Delta wing on their jersey there, and find them in space. Absolutely, but no, not in the short term. Right now, there's 1,400 people at the headquarters, which is at the Pentagon, and they're actually shopping for a permanent location. I
Okay.
actually have the memo here that I got from the Air Force. I've highlighted some points here. If you're a community looking to bring the Space Force to your town, it's right here. There's a memo from the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, Mr. John Henderson, and he says that they are actively looking for a base for 1,400, or excuse me, for their personnel. So yeah, they've got livability standards here. It's got to be within 25 miles of a U.S. military base. So if you're a town or village somewhere in the United States, because it has to be in the U.S., and you would like to host the Space Force, you can apply. You have until June 30th to submit your application, and you go online, and it has a little letter here, and you send it in and tell them who your point of contact is and all the lovely things that make your community desirable for a Space Force. And these are the criteria. Here's your screening criteria right there. So it includes metropolitan statistical areas, proximity to military base, livability index, and then they evaluate it based on mission related, 40 points, infrastructure capacity, 30 points, community support, 15 points, cost to the Department of the Air Force, 15 points, and a cool factor. No, there's no cool factor. Anyway.
So I thought maybe they would have made Area 51 their main base. I mean, come on.
Dude, that's like in the middle of freaking Nevada. Who wants to go to that place? It's a reason. There's a reason they hid the aliens out there because nobody wants to go
You
there.
just confirmed it. You just.
I think that was my door.
Okay. All right. So it's the beginning of something very exciting. Much like we're like you said, we are reminded by John F. Kennedy was starting the whole mission to go to the moon, and it's definitely historical times. Do you know of any other country that is working on something like this? Could there be maybe China or any other country that also is working on a space force? Do you know?
Well, I don't know if they're working on space forces, but within the context of their own structures of government and/or military, there are other countries that are doing this. A lot of countries have space programs,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily from a space force perspective. Even African countries have space programs. South Africa had an astronaut that went up on one of our missions. But China is the one that's most active, actually doing things. As I mentioned, they already have an anti-satellite program that's been tested and caused all kinds of chaos in space. But beyond that, they also have plans to land on the moon in this decade, if I'm not mistaken. In this decade of the 20s, they intend to land Chinese personnel on the moon and establish a moon base. They're trying to come up with a moon base. And meanwhile, Elon Musk is sending his Ferrari or whatever it is to Mars with his webcam in there. I guess it's a nuclear powered webcam or something like that. Anyway,
Yeah. Do you
but
think?
so we're going to.
Sorry. Do you think China will put sweatshops on the moon? Maybe to.
Well, I think you lose your comparative advantage because the shipping cost just becomes, unless, once again, back to Star Trek, if you have your transporter, which can you dematerialize and rematerialize your T-shirts and your overly priced iPods, then yeah, they might put a base on the moon. Yeah.
We have a question here. Ice from Ice ZA says or asks, surely China is looking at it and possibly Russia? What about Russia?
Well, Russia was going to be the next one I said, but Russia is really just an African country located in Eurasia. It's a resource dependent governance mess. With now the opposite of many African countries, this population is actually declining for a number of reasons. And I don't mean to insult Africa by comparing Russia to Africa. That wasn't my intent. But no, and I don't mean to diss on Russia. But Russia has a large military, has a lot of capacity, a lot of capability. But I'm not aware of where they're at in their program. They've been much more focused on meddling in their neighbors' affairs, trying to expand their influence in Africa of late, at least for weapons sales. So I'm not so sure what they're doing so far as space. And no, I really don't know. The stuff I'm sharing with you all, by the way, is all entirely unclassified. No government officials were harmed in the production of this analysis. And no classified information has been compromised. Unlike Hillary Clinton, I'm not disclosing classified information in a public medium.
All right, so there is stuff that you know that is classified.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I thought you were going to give the I can neither conform nor deny.
Well, that's funny because it may or may not be true, and I couldn't say one way or the other. It just leaves everybody wondering. So,
All right, so I'm not gonna get a affirmative answer on if you've seen, heard, or witnessed, or may have come across in your career while traveling, while being on the ground in all these different countries. You might have had a conversation, heard, peeked at, or someone alluded to the possibility of external life. Sorry, extraterrestrial life.
well, I mean, listen, I have a huge interest in astronomy. A lot of people are talking about extraterrestrial life now, but we're talking about little, single-celled, multi-celled organisms on Enceladus, Titan, Ganymede. No, probably not Ganymede, but certainly Enceladus and Titan, real possibilities for life. I mean, if you follow astronomy at all, these are salad days for astronomy. It's funny because people always talk about the science is settled. The science is settled. You're a science denier. Science is never settled, man. Do you know how wrong the astronomers have been in the last century?
Yeah.
4 moons around Saturn. Really? I think the number's a lot higher. 4 moons around Jupiter. No, it's a lot higher than that.
Mm.
And we're discovering. Look at Pluto. New Horizons has to be the most amazing thing that ever happened. Pluto's a cold, dead world. There's no geologic activity. My God, Pluto's surface looks smoother than my lawn. That's geologic activity, man. And you're
Yeah.
laughing, but it's true. I got something tearing up my lawn. I got big holes all over the place. But seriously, but the point is that, there's a very real possibility there's life in our solar system, right here in our solar system. But that's completely untied to Space Force, and we'll not be putting Space Marines up to hunt down, ocean-dwelling single-celled creatures under the ice cap of Enceladus. So, anyway.
All right. Well, yeah, Ice also has another question for us. Have you seen any UFOs as a civilian, Chris or Joe? I'll answer that first. No, I haven't, not yet. Obviously, everything I've seen has been on documentaries or when it hits the news, like, oh, there's these lights in the sky and stuff like that. I've never seen an unidentified flying object. And something, actually, now that Isaac brings that up as well, I'm going to bring up the article that was released not too long ago. But I'll let you answer if you've
Sure.
seen a UFO before.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen UFOs many times. Absolutely. You're smiling because you think I'm going to tell a joke. But
No,
no,
no.
no, a UFO is an unidentified flying object. Anytime you can't identify something, that's a UFO. But I know the question's really not about that. The question's about if I see little green men. Have I been to Roswell, Area 51? Yeah. Listen, I do see lots of UFOs, flying erratically, in fact. But then when I see them land, I see the South African Airlines tail flash on it, and that's what the UFO was. But since they're not flying anymore and they're in liquidation, as a state-owned enterprise, a parastatal that's paralyzed. That's why I like the word parastatal, because they're paralyzed. Anyway, yeah, but no, seriously. No, actually, I have seen strange things in my lifetime. Lights at night, erratically flying things. I have a lot of hours in helicopters as a person in the military. Around aviation quite a bit, and I've flown quite a number of hours in helicopters. Helicopters can fly at all kinds of weird, erratic patterns. Fixed-wing aircraft and jets can't fly at those patterns.
Mm.
So, high performance jets can do fast maneuvers and turn and stuff, which at a distance can look, you'll surprise. It's not what you expect. But commercial airliners and small props can't do those sorts of things unless they're crashing into the ground. So what I'm getting at is I've seen lots of unidentified things that I can't identify with strange things at night. Helicopters aren't normally flying at night. They do fly at night sometimes. But the point is, anything that you can't identify in the air is an unidentified. These days, there's lots of them. All these damn drones in the air.
That's
These
true.
UAVs that people are buying. And some of these things are like the size of my hand. You pick them
Mm.
up, in a little store and pay like 100 Rand for them. That's how cheap they are these days. So yeah, those. Now here in the U.S., the Federal Aviation Administration has now regulated the use of them. I have a drone. I have one of those GJ Phantom drones that I bought myself as a treat for graduating from the War College many years ago. And now it's several generations behind. But I had to register that with the Federal Aviation Administration when I came back to States and have a license. But it's basically you go online, you just have to label it, so if it crashes or someone thinks you're taking pictures of people in bikinis, they can get you. So anyway.
All right. So again, yeah, I can neither confirm nor deny answer. Okay, so a few weeks ago, I don't know if you guys saw this article. I think it was on BBC or CNN. I can't remember. Maybe 2-3 weeks ago, somewhere around there, where they released an article saying that the U.S. government has acknowledged the existence of UFOs. Now, like Chris just said, UFOs are unidentified flying objects, and they say that those do exist. They're not exactly saying that aliens exist. Now, shortly after that, we were the flag of the U.S. Space Force was shown. I think there's a connection there. I really do. I think there's that's my theory. You're like, no, don't be crazy, Joe.
No. I was just thinking that that when people zoll, they put the saliva on the papers, and when they zoll, they share that zoll. Here you go, Joe. Here you go. Here. Good stuff. No, I don't mean to make light of it, Joe. But you're a comedian, so it's
Yeah.
all is fair, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
No, it is entirely a coincidence. I mean, the U.S. government has in the past admitted that they've had unidentified flying objects. This isn't the first time it's ever happened. In fact, in specific instances, many times the Air Force and others have come out and said we can't explain what people saw, because there's a lot of times people have video footage of it, or they take it from their camera these days, and they'll submit it to the government, and they'll look at it and say we can't. They'll look at radar, they'll do tracings. There's all kinds of ways to research this and follow it. But I mean, look, that was it Malaysian Air Flights aircraft or whatever it was, the Airbus that disappeared and just vanished from, we never found it. Like, apparently pieces of it supposedly turned up in Madagascar a few years later, but all those people disappeared. No one knows where it's at. You would think that in the modern age that we could find anything in the air anytime and identify it, but it's not quite that simple. Even huge commercial airliners can disappear, which is shocking, but it has happened. Although it could be, there was this fantastic movie, was it called Millennium, I think it was called, with Cheryl Tiegs back, I think it was Cheryl Ladd, not Cheryl Tiegs, Cheryl Ladd, who used to be on Charlie's Angels, and with Chris Christopherson, in which people from the future, because the dystopian future, the Earth was so destroyed and they couldn't reproduce, so they were going back in time, and they knew our history. So that every time a plane crashed, they would take dummies of people who were actually dead bodies but had the same, makeup of DNA. They'd go into a time portal, go onto the commercial flight before it crashed, take all the people that were all going to die in the flight and put everyone else to sleep, take them off the plane through the portal to the future so they could reproduce the population, and all those people would actually die on the anyway. So it was a really cool movie. I think it was called Millennium. Anyway,
All right, I'll check
good
that
stuff.
one out. It sounds very interesting, but that actually goes back to, because I read a comment here from, where is it? Let me find it quickly. Yes, from Cloud Sounds, who says UFOs are us from the future. So that's basically what that movie, in a way, was talking about. Then we got a few questions here. Will Austin Steinbart be SF commander?
Well, they already have a commander.
Who's the commander?
His name is sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now, but I put it down here. What's his name? Gosh bless it. I cannot find it here. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, there's already a commander, but I mean, commanders it's a 4-star general, and the commanders they usually do this for a couple of years, 3 years max for a command. Gosh, I had it here and actually made a note of it because I don't know the general that's responsible for this. But what is the name? Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Ask the next question or say something while I look for this. Oh, here it is. Jay Raymond. General Jay Raymond.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is that in the Navy, the chief of the Navy or the commander of the Navy is called the Chief of Naval Operations, CNO, which in the military parlance, everybody knows what the CNO is. The person in charge of Space Force is going to be called the CSO, Chief of Space Operations. We don't call that the Chief of Staff of the Army the Chief of Ground Operations. We don't do that. That sounds silly, but it'll be the CSO. So that'd be General Raymond is the person right now that is the commander. So they've already have a commander, already appointed one. So again, the command actually was established in December of 2019. So they're already up and running and doing things largely because they took existing resources. Now most of what they do is going to come out of the hip pocket of the Air Force. So 75% of the logistics needs and resources will be supplied by the Air Force. So that's why it's going to stay in the Air Force. Plus, all the personnel initially will come from the Air Force. In the future, they'll recruit their own forces.
Okay, so I have some questions now that are a little bit off topic, but I just want to know a few things about you. So as a colonel now that's retired, do you still get information from the government? Like, do they still send you certain information? Is there information that you're not allowed to talk about? Was there a time period where you couldn't talk about anything because of the nature of your job?
Well, there's a lot of things I can't talk about because I was read on to classified programs that were restricted, and I can never disclose those things. Unlike Hillary Clinton, I can never disclose classified information. Um,
What
did
happens
I
if you
say that?
do?
I could go to jail.
Okay, so they're not gonna like Men in Black aren't gonna like show up and like kill you and zap you with a mind thing and
No, I think homebrew would probably cause the memory loss. Don't need a zapper for that one. Yeah, no, no. When you have access to classified information, you sign a non-disclosure statement saying you won't disclose this. Now, if I know something and I want to share it, and I think it's something that's of interest to the public, I can request that I be allowed to have that declassified. So, and that does happen on occasion, especially for senior government officials when there's something that they want to talk about, or say they're running for political office. They can request that a classification authority review the information they want to share. And if it doesn't, here's the bottom line: people lose sight of things. The reason governments keep secret, well, in theory, now in practice it's a little bit different, but the reason governments keep secrets is not to keep things away from the public, although that's the case in many countries. I'm talking about in a representative democracy. It's not to keep things away. It's to protect the nation's interests. So, for instance, if you're negotiating a trade treaty with China, you can't be telling everybody in the media, well, we're going to threaten the Chinese with this, or we're going to withhold that, or we're going to offer them 12% instead of the 6% they want. Well,
mm,
now they know your position. They know how
mm,
strong or weak you are. So you have to have secrets there. When you're dealing, so in a diplomatic environment, and you have an embassy in Pretoria, and you're dealing with the government there, you need to have a bit of secrecy so that you can learn about what's going on in Pretoria in South African government, and they can learn about you, but you can't, because you can't share everything.
mm.
Anyway, so when it comes to classified information, the main reason it's classified is to protect the source, how we got the information.
Yeah.
Because think about it, if people know, like for instance, if not that I can confirm or deny that we might have satellites in space, it might be doing things. But if you knew that such things were up in space and you knew there was a capability or not, then you might modify your behavior or not. Anyway, what I can say is this, is that famously Osama bin Laden, we were listening to his telephone communications over a certain commercial network. And a loudmouth government official in Congress disclosed that we were listening to his conversations. And then we
Mm,
couldn't find him for several years because he stopped doing it. We were about to go in and get Osama bin Laden. This is not too long after 9/11. It's just a couple years after that. The government was prepared to do it. This isn't classified. I'm sharing you unclassified information, open source. This is from the media. We were going to go get him, and he disappeared because he found out, thanks to some blabbermouth, that we were listening to his conversations. He had no idea that that was a capability the U.S. government even had.
mm,
Nobody did, except the people working it who could keep their mouths shut and could be trusted with that information. So the reason for the secrecy normally is, at least in our system, normally is to protect the sourcing so that you don't lose sources. You
mm,
know, what Edward Snowden did is got hundreds of thousands of people killed and has gotten people immediately executed who were accused of being spies for the U.S. In Russia, among other places. But beyond that, he's caused chaos around the world by disclosing the things he did illegally in his grandstanding, egotistical way of being a showboat instead of following the actual procedures that exist to deal with that situation. And he has cost the U.S. government probably tens of billions of dollars in lost collection capability. His single, shameful, imprudent, childish little bitch act.
yeah.
Yeah, I did say that. Sorry. Hopefully that doesn't get your channel blocked. But no, you can see where I stand about Edward Snowden. I understand his issue. He was right from my perspective that the government was abusing what it was doing with the acts that it had. It was going beyond what it's supposed to. And now we see what they've done to General Flynn and what they did to officials in the Trump administration. Yes, the government has overreached, but the answer is not to undermine a nation's ability to learn about threats. And that's what he did. And he undermined our ability, plus essentially the whole world, because much of the world is our friend, partner, ally in the things that we do to keep the world safe. Anyway, there you go. That's a soapbox.
No, it was actually very fascinating, interesting things. And you're right about Snowden. I will probably leave that conversation for another episode, but just quickly want to touch on him. Like, I guess it's a moral thing, a moral dilemma. He saw things that he didn't like, and I guess while he may have been morally correct, if I can say that, his method of execution was definitely wrong. I think maybe there could have been other ways that he could have expressed his disdain with the method and without costing, like you said, so many lives in the end and millions of dollars. But
Billions,
yeah,
billions.
so IZA says, yeah, and how ironic is it that he's now hiding in Russia? I know it's actually quite ironic, but but yeah, all right, cool. So there's things that you can't talk about. You mentioned that you've worked with the NSA and stuff like that. So what would happen besides going to jail and stuff like that? What would you then have to? Is it like the movies? Because like with Snowden when he released everything, right? Like when he did that whole leak and stuff like that. How long, how efficient is it for the government to find you if you don't get out in time? Was it like a 24-hour window? Could they find you? Like, how efficient are they?
Well, unfortunately, the greatest danger when it comes to classified information protecting sources is the trusted user. So they do extensive background checks on people that they grant access to, and ostensibly you're reliable and can be trusted. But the problem is that we have millions of people that are in positions of trust like that,
Mm.
millions of people. So the challenge now at different levels as you go up in security, the number declines, but it's still a shockingly high number of people who have access to the most sensitive information that our government possesses and our
Interesting.
allies possess. And the problem is that this goes back to Bradley Manning, same sort of thing. So what happened after 9/11 is that one of the lessons that came out of that the government learned, which I don't think they learned completely correctly. I agree with it, but not entirely. They learned that one of the challenges that led to 9/11 beyond their capacity to think creatively, and I'll tell you that some intelligence analysts in the U.S. intelligence community did predict the sort of things that happened, and
Mm.
not me, I wasn't doing that, but others did. But it just never got any traction, wasn't paid attention to, wasn't of interest. But one of the things that happened is they said, well, the problem here is that the intelligence agencies can't share information. We have stovepipes in which the information can only go up or down to leadership, up and down to national leadership, but it can't go laterally to be shared. So let me give an example. As a federal counterintelligence agent, which is one of my roles in the Army that I did, if I had information, for instance, that I might have learned overseas as a consequence of something I was doing overseas, and I wanted to share it with the FBI about someone who was in the States
Mm-hmm.
with a green card that I learned might be taking lessons to fly planes in Florida and maybe shouldn't be, I couldn't share that with the FBI. I would have been sanctioned and or punished and gone to jail for that.
Interesting.
There
Wow.
were federal restrictions in place to prevent that from happening because the FBI is law enforcement. In the Army, my role is counterintelligence, which is a law enforcement role, but strictly for espionage, sabotage, counterintelligence. So if I came across drug dealers, that's it. I have to back off and refer it to a criminal authority, like the military police if I'm
Mm.
overseas, or to civilian authorities in the States. And my authority only goes on military installations in the U.S. Now, overseas, it extends beyond military installations for all U.S. personnel. But anyway, the point is that we weren't allowed to share information in a lot of respects. So one of the things they did is they decided to loosen up and let people share information in the intelligence community. And while that was helpful and it made a big difference in the fight on the war on terrorism, not the best term, by the way, but in the global war on terrorism, and also in the campaigns in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places like the Philippines against Abu Sayyaf and other places, what it did is it did make a huge difference in helping analysts get the information they needed to make the right predictions, the best predictions, and get it to decision makers. But what it also did is made us incredibly vulnerable.
Mm.
So Bradley Manning enlisted in the Army, and he's a private first class, which is a very junior soldier with just a couple years of service. He has now got access to State Department diplomatic cables, which are classified almost always. There are exceptions. And the reason they're classified is, like I said, you have to have secrets when you're negotiating with another country. So, for instance, and this isn't the US, this is every country in the world. You have an embassy, and this is not a secret. The purpose of an embassy is to maintain relations and also understand your friend or your adversary, whatever the case is. And everyone knows that the purpose of them is not only to meet and shake hands and go to cocktail parties and help bring trade, it's also to report back about what's happening in that foreign capital.
Yeah.
I mean, South Africa has an embassy in DC. They're spying on us, if you want to call it that, and we're spying on them. People don't like that term, but that's essentially what it is. But it's a gentleman's game. We
Yeah.
all know. Everyone knows who these people are. So if you see the South African diplomat coming and you don't want them to know anything, you shut up, right? If you want them to know something intentionally to keep tensions down, then you make sure they hear it and you share it with them. Anyway, so my point is that these diplomats from every country will write reports, and it gets sent back to their national capitals. so that their foreign ministries are informed about what's going on.
Mm.
Well, those things get classified. In the past, Bradley Manning would never have had access to those cables. But by loosening the controls over classified information, he could simply go from one spot on a classified network to another and find these cables. And whatever possessed Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, to go steal, because this is what happened. Somehow, he took either a CD and a writable CD and or a thumb drive, most likely a thumb drive, and stuck it on a classified computer. Now, in most places, the IT personnel disable those things or remove them so they can't be used. But obviously, that didn't happen here. Stuck it on there, illegally copied and stole thousands of cables from our embassies around the world, and then gave it to Julian Assange. And Julian Assange, who has no volume control, shared it with the world because he thinks nobody should have secrets.
Mm.
But anyway, so that's what happened there, and that's the damage that can be done. And that's and Snowden did something similar. So the whole point of this, it was a long story there, but the point is that when you have a trusted insider, that's your most vulnerable position, because a trusted insider can take things, and it's difficult to put control measures in place, particularly in the modern ages. 30 years ago, there were few computers, and there were no thumb drives, and you couldn't connect to them, and the networks were much less trafficked. So it was far harder to do this sort of things. Now, there was a movie called The Falcon and the Snowman about a company called TRW, and it had who's that annoying actor that was in Fast Times at Ridgemont High? Sean Penn. Sean Penn was in it, and it was Falcon and Snowman, about these two clowns that worked for a U.S. private corporation that was involved in intelligence, and they were trying to think they were bigger than they were, and they tried to sell it to the Soviets and the Mexican embassy and stuff like that. Anyway, they wound up in jail forever because they betrayed our country.
Mm.
That time, it was much more difficult to do the sorts of things that Snowden and Manning did. They were able to do that in part because we loosened the standards and made ourselves vulnerable.
Mm.
But it's a risk. It's a risk.
Yeah. We have a question here about, might be a bit off topic, but what did Trump and Cyril, sorry, what did Trump say to Cyril at Davos, Davos, that made him change his tune? Made who change his tune? Trump or Cyril? I don't know if you know about that.
This wasn't this year. You mean last year?
I don't know. Cloud sounds is not very specific. Can you, Cloud, if you don't mind giving us a little bit more detail on that question, so we can give it a proper answer. And while he's fixing that, cool. So let's get back a little bit on track with Space Force and stuff.
Space Force.
Yeah, Space Force. Wow. So obviously we're going to touch, when we say Space Force, we're going to touch on space, we're going to touch on aliens, we're going to touch on all that. So I've got a burning question also to ask you.
Okay.
Area 51, that's pretty much, we know that exists. There's no denying that exists. Are there aliens there?
Well, in that state, that's in Nevada, there's lots of aliens, and we deport them all the time.
I feel like people have asked you these questions before.
And no, that wasn't an anti-Mexican joke. That was illegal aliens come from all over the world. Anyway.
Okay. No. I'll be more specific then. Let me rephrase, Colonel. Are there extraterrestrial beings in Area 51?
I honestly don't know. That's not a confirm or deny. I don't know. Hollywood sure thinks there are. And I'll tell you, Independence Day was an awesome movie, man.
Were you ever interested to go and check it out, or did you not have that authority? Could you not, were you not, what's it called, allowed? Authorized, that's the one.
It's in the middle of freaking nowhere. I have no interest whatsoever to go there. I mean, I'd much rather go to the Crew and hang out with sheep.
All right, fine, fair enough. But I thought maybe as being a Star Trek fan or Star Wars fan or whatever, you might have an interest in.
What are you going to see? A couple hangars and, in the middle of the desert plains, with mountains around you? I mean, there's not really anything. Honestly, there's nothing. Well, Vandenberg Air Force Base is where the shuttle used to land when it came back in California. That's kind of like Area 51. It's all flat desert with, obviously because they had to land this thing on a long strip. There used to be big crowds that went out to Vandenberg Air Force Base when the shuttle started landing there back in the 80s. that might have been the only time I'd be interested in something like that. But I mean, we don't have the shuttle anymore, and that's just not happening. So I just can't imagine. Now, Cape Canaveral. I've been at NASA, where Cape Canaveral launches out of. That's awesome. There's stuff to see there, to do all the time, even when there aren't launches. But Area 51, there's nothing to do. I'm sure the military personnel that are assigned there are probably like, how did I get stuck in this place? I could have gone to Greenland.
Okay, well, have you heard of this guy? I think you may have mentioned his name. I can't remember his name, but there was a guy in the 80s, I think, or the 90s, who came out and he was an employee of Area 51. He said he claims that he's worked there and for many years, and he kind of became a whistleblower to a certain extent. And since then, he claims that the government hasn't kept their eye off of him. And he was saying that there are aliens, that he's seen them, that he was explaining all the tech at that time, the kind of things they were researching and stuff like that. Do you know about this guy? And do you know who I'm talking about? Because I can't remember his name.
I'm not familiar with, but there've been a number of different folks who've not just at Area 51, but other places come out and expose things. So even the military officer back in the 1940s at Roswell,
Mm.
who went out and investigated that, claimed things later on after the fact, although reported things pretty openly at the beginning. The problem with this sort of thing and start the whole Roswell conspiracy, from my perspective, is that the government released some information which appeared in the newspaper the next day, and then somebody said, no, no, we can't do that. And I don't know why they did that. So that, I think, it really started the Roswell controversy. Um, Here's the thing. Listen, if you believe in astronomy, if you believe what astronomers tell us, and you believe the universe is the way it is and the size, the distances between us and even the next galaxy or next solar system are just, not next galaxy, next solar system in this galaxy are just so vast. How long it would take. I really like the movie Contact with Jodie Foster. That was awesome. That was Carl Sagan who wrote that script for that thing. He was dead when they made it, but I think he was dead when they made it. Maybe anyway, but he died around anyway. But Carl Sagan, so that came from him. Contact was brilliant, and what I liked about it is because they're talking about, I think it was Alpha Centauri was where the supposed the other civilization was at, but that's thousands of light years away. And they had a technology that just kind of got your consciousness there in a matter of moments. Okay, I could buy that.
Mm.
Light, sound, even bending physics, wormholes, those are all theoretically possible. But that wasn't a physical presence. She wasn't really on that planet. She was talking to the alien in that really cool looking world. I'd like to hang out there, by the way. I really like that. But assuming the air is breathable, but and the gravity holds me down. But physical presence, it's just such a great distance. I mean, it's I don't think we can even imagine the technology. I mean, if an alien had it and it existed, okay, fine, great. But if these aliens are out there, why are they hanging out? Why aren't they here? Maybe they are. Maybe Cyril Ramaphosa is an alien. That would explain a lot.
Oh man, that's gonna get me in trouble. All right, so
You and me both.
okay, so Cloud Sounds actually gave me the name of the guy. He Bob Lazar. Does that ring a bell? Bob Lazar.
It does, but the story isn't ringing a bell, but the name does sound familiar. Yeah, yep,
Okay, cool.
yep.
That means that you are keeping tabs on him. Element 115. Element 115. That was what he was talking about. This element that they discovered from a spaceship, and how it has these contributes and stuff. Look, it's a very interesting story. Bob Lazar's story is very, very interesting. But again, it's a conspiracy theory. It's definitely a theory that or a story that leaves you thinking, maybe, maybe not. There's nothing. Again, it's one of those I can neither confirm nor deny scenarios. Okay, so we have a few questions coming in now that we're talking about aliens. Let's see. Have you seen the Project Blue Book series based on the systematic studies of unidentified flying objects conducted by the United States Air Force in 1952? Really cool series. So, have you seen Project Blue Book series?
I have not, but I've seen a number of programs that have talked about that investigation on television. Listen, conspiracy theories are interesting.
Mm.
They're fascinating. It's the same reason why people like science fiction. It's the realm of the potentially possible, or what could be, or what might be. Just really interesting stuff. So, I mean, I find this stuff fascinating too. I mean, science fiction is one of my favorite genres when it
Yeah.
comes to movies and television. Huge Stargate fan. I love them all. Stargate Atlantis, especially. It's good stuff. I liked Star Trek Voyager. Me and five other people
Yeah.
apparently.
No, I
Um,
do. I do. I like it. Voyager was probably the best one out of all the Star Trek series, and I have a friend Nelson Digabay, who's also a fellow comedian, who would agree, but at the same time be very mad at me for saying that. Because he likes Voyager, but he thinks that
yeah.
the another series that was better than it. But
Well, I don't think the Voyager was the best. There, I disagree with you. I
yeah,
mean,
see,
if I was Janeway's boss, she wouldn't have a job. I mean, she lost control of her ship like every week. Someone else took her ship from her. I'm like, can you not control this thing? My God, this is insane. No, but I mean, she was the worst captain ever. I mean, not the acting, but just she
yeah.
lost her ship every time you turned around. Actually, on that series, I think one of the most promising shows when it came to Star Trek that died a premature death, although it did get 4 seasons, but it was really cracking the last season was Enterprise with Scott
Mm,
Bakula
mm,
as Jonathan Archer. That was really well done. Went back to the early days when they first went into space, sort of thing. Pretty cool stuff. But there's a lot of cool science fiction, and a lot of it dies before its time. Like
mm,
The Expanse nearly died, but Amazon has picked it up and produced another season now. And then, unfortunately, Dark Matter, which I really loved, has gone away because they just didn't want to make it anymore. The production cost, it wasn't that expensive. And that show will never continue because all the actors have moved on to other programs now. So, yeah, but science fiction is pretty cool. So I enjoy it. It doesn't make you a geek either, to
no,
be a science fiction fan. So,
no. We have another question here from Storm Legacy. Thank you so much, Storm, for tuning in. Question: Is UFO a UFO just because it doesn't have a human claim name yet? Like, I'd like to think upon a time comets were UFOs, then it got a name. So I guess what he's trying to say is, but I mean, like, okay, so I'm not exactly sure what he means. Is a
so
UFO?
I think I understand where he's going. So let me go there. Okay. So for instance, just the last year, I think it was, or was the year before, we had this extra solar object that came into our solar system,
Mm-hmm.
and it's shaped like a long cigar, like a stogie. I mean, we're talking hundreds of miles long, and like a sliver of flint that had been chipped off the side of a hill. That thing came from outside the solar system. It's the first object that humans have ever seen that's not from the solar system that passed through it. And they gave it a Hawaiian name, Mahi Mahi or something, Mauna Kea or something like that. I can never pronounce it. The Hawaiians use so many vowels, I just get dizzy when I try to pronounce their words. But anyway, that it was an unidentified flying object. We didn't know what it was. It wasn't an Earth flying object, but it was an interstellar and unidentified flying object that we couldn't identify until it got close enough. They knew it was coming. They were observing something that was moving towards this direction, and then they were able to observe it when it got closer and actually get photographs of it. Pretty cool,
Mm.
or sketches. They made sketches of. But yeah, that would be an unidentified flying object, and that's, I guess, we didn't have the term UFO, but I mean, our predecessors in the Stone Age, people making Stonehenge and those who came before them probably saw Halley's Comet and things like that and go, ho,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
whatever they call it, unidentified flying. Yeah, so yeah, that's why it's a generic term, and it can be anything. And unidentified flying objects are designated as such, and oftentimes they're later identified as a small prop aircraft or a commercial airliner that was mislabeled or something like that. So yeah, a lot of unidentified objects are eventually identified through investigation, and they turn out to be human-produced things. But could they be little green men or little blue men? I think that would be cooler blue than green. But anyway, um, or better yet, little blue women. But yeah, so yeah, they could be, but we haven't seen that yet,
Yeah.
at least as far as I know.
All right, cool. So we're nearing the end of the show. I have a question. Another question is a bit off topic. But I was wondering, one, would you be prepared to come back to chat about 9/11?
Oh, I'd be happy to talk about 9/11 all day long, every day, forever. I'm still angry about the way we didn't prepare for it properly. And I worked counterterrorism before that, so yes. And also some of our response since then I've not been happy with. So yeah, happy to talk about 9/11 anytime you like. I have no constraints other than not disclosing classified information.
Yeah, I understand that 100%. But I'm still gonna ask you things, a lot of things. But I would. 9/11 for me was a time, and I'll explain it a bit more when we do the episode. But it was a time for me where it did change the course of my life. Even though I was in Egypt at the time when it happened, and I would like to maybe you'd like to hear from my perspective what it was like for me when I was in Egypt and that happened. But also for a man that's been in the military during that time, I would love to know a bit more about what happened in the aftermath during that time. That time in our history has always fascinated me, and obviously we'll touch on the conspiracy theories that has to come up with 9/11. It always does. But yeah, we'll have a nice conversation about it. Would you prepare? You'd be prepared to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
And I've heard a fair portion of that story in your experience because I listened to your program and you explained it. But yeah, I'd be happy to listen to it again because I probably didn't hear all of it. But yeah, no, just really quickly. So when 9/11 actually happened, I was working at our embassy in Tunisia in the attaché office. And I had gone to the space where we have an unclassified computer to do business, to send mail and to take care of personal things. It's there. And we have a television in that space in our embassy. And I was sitting there writing some emails for a trip that I was planning on taking to, I think the trip was supposed to be East Africa. Anyway, so I was communicating, writing these emails to people that I knew were in East Africa, making sure it was feasible. And the gunnery sergeant came in and said, "Do you see this?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Come here, look at this." And he had another TV. I didn't have mine on. So I went and looked at that TV. And that was the first tower was in flames. And he
Yeah.
goes, "Yeah." And we're listening to this as it's unfolding. So, because it was afternoon in Tunisia. And they said that it looked like a plane crash. And I'm like, plane crash? The visibility is like 40 miles. I can see freaking Connecticut from there. Plane crash because
Yeah.
they had this the typical CNN idiot that just because they look pretty they think they're a journalist standing on top of a rooftop looking back down it, and I'm like, I can see freaking Connecticut from there. That's not, no one's flying into there unless they had a cardiac arrest at the wheels,
Yeah.
and you should have had autopilot anyway. Anyway, so and then I actually watched it like a lot of people around the world did. I actually watched the second plane slam into the second tower.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's where I was at. I was in Tunisia working in attaché work. Yeah, so
Yeah.
anyway,
Well,
I keep getting messages from Giselle's manager, who's also an illusionist and a magician. He's a master illusionist. That's Johann Eisel. If your colleague here is still around, maybe if he knows Johann Eisel, he's the guy that famously made the Voortrekker Monument disappear. He's turned women into tigers and all kinds of other stuff. But yeah, he keeps sending me a message saying, "Where's it at? Where's it at?" But I can't change it because it's on my phone. If I do, I'll lose it. So he's missed the show. I'll refer him to it after the fact.
no worries.
But he wanted to come on and watch the show. So
No
that's a
worries.
shame. Anyway.
That's cool, man. I look. I think the 9/11 topic will be very interesting as a civilian and as someone in the army talking about that. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I got a few last moment questions here. There's Russell who says, well, it's not a question, he's just stating, I have a very personal connection and experience with 9/11. Well, Russell, next time we talk about 9/11, which will probably be maybe next week sometime, tune in and let us know. And then we have here Cloud Sounds that says, please ask Chris if he is aware of Russell J. Gould. Gold. Gould.
Gould. Gould.
Gould,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, the name doesn't sound familiar to me. Sorry.
But you, okay. I can't tell if you're being serious or not. I can't tell if that was.
No, okay. I'm being serious. I don't recognize the name. The only Gould I know is Elliot Gould, who's an actor.
Oh, okay. Gould. I don't know if I was pronouncing that correctly.
Should
Gould.
be Gould. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Russell J. Gould, you don't know. All right, so just before we close off here, unfortunately, we didn't get any confirmation of aliens from
We
Chris.
did. I told you we deport aliens each and every day.
Extraterrestrial beings.
Well, actually, that's what I love about the Men in Black series because they have immigration for the extraterrestrial
Yeah.
beings who come in. They make sure they're actually authorized to be there because even extraterrestrials come in illegally, apparently.
Yeah, so we didn't get a straight answer, but we got a few interesting answers to the Space Force. It's interesting days for America now that that's started, and it sounds like there is a need for it. So you know what? You've convinced me. I'm proud. It's good. Not convinced on the logo still. I don't know. I think it just feels like they copied it. Why couldn't they come up with their own new like look? Like like it's like President Trump was like a fan of Star Trek, and then he was like, just use that, and we'll go with it. I don't know. That's
What would you prefer they have? Like a planet with like an orange aura about it, with like a tuft of breeze blowing off, looks like air.
no, but
Would that
like
have been better?
no, I don't know. Something futuristic. Something I don't
It's
know.
very futuristic,
That's
dude.
not. It's from a
That's awesome.
series. It's from a series. It's not futuristic. They copied it from a series. That
Yeah.
yeah, you see.
Again, then
No.
surrender your mobile phone. You have no right to it if you don't like this.
Wait a second. Here's an interesting question. Do you know what
Yeah,
those? Because every flag, every time they use something on a flag, the symbols mean something. Do you know what these symbols mean?
absolutely. Absolutely. You ready? I've
Yeah.
got it right here. I made sure I had this because I thought somebody might ask it. So the heraldry, that's the seal. I'm sorry. Where's the flag at? Okay. Whoops. Do we get, well, the seal actually is the one that has that flag, but then has Department of the Air Force around it. So this flag comes from the seal. So let me read what the seal says. The heraldry of the seal elements follows. Dark blue and white combine to represent the vast recesses of outer space. The delta wing, which apparently Joe has lots of problems with and he's being triggered by. The delta wing evokes historic ties. I'll hold this up while I read. Okay, you don't need to see my face. The Delta Wing evokes historic ties to the earliest days of the U.S. Air Force space community back to 1982 and symbolizes change and innovation. It represents all variations of space vehicles that support our national defense strategy and national security strategy, space strategy. Dark and light shades of gray within the Delta embody the 24/7 operations of the Space Force. In other words, they work at night and daytime. That's kind of cool. While the placement and upward orientation of the Delta reveals the central role of the Space Force in defending the space domain. The globe represents the terrestrial home of the U.S. Space Force and its support to the joint warfighters. The elliptical orbit around the globe signifies defense and protection from all adversaries and threats emanating from the space domain. In other words, like they're patrolling the Earth, is spinning around. That's kind of cool. It also represents ongoing interagency cooperation and allied partnerships. The white Polaris symbolizes the guiding light of security and alludes to a constant presence and vigilance in space now and in the future. Two clusters of small stars represent the space assets developed, maintained, and operated by U.S. Space Force. And the three larger stars symbolize organized, trained, and equipped functions of the Space Force. Now, how cool is that, man? You're just looking at the flag, not what it symbolizes. Get on board, Joe, or I'm not doing your show again.
No, I will admit this. Once you've
I'm
explained
just
it,
kidding.
I know, but once you've explained the symbols, it actually sounds really cool. Like it does sound really
Yeah.
cool. Clearly, they put a lot of time and effort into the design of the flag, and it's
They also
cool. It's
trademarked.
cool. It's
They
cool.
also, they also trademarked it. It's trademarked.
Good.
Yeah, they should. But I
They
don't
should.
think the Chinese will give them residuals when they make flags.
All right, cool. Well, we're pretty much out of time now. So, Chris, this was super awesome. A lot of insightful and interesting things that you spoke about. Look, understand that when you come onto my show, I'm going to try my best to try and get something out of you that is juicy and interesting. So, but you clearly can handle yourself under interrogation, clearly and obviously because you've been a colonel. You have training in that, so yeah. But just so you know, like I'm always gonna want to know something juicy, but I know that you will give what you can, and I understand that if you don't, because at the end of the day, no one wants to go to jail. Um, but thank
It's
you.
not going to jail, man. I don't want to jeopardize the security of Americans and our friends, partners, and allies around the world. That's the
Absolutely.
real issue.
That's also true. Actually, well put too. But again, we have fun and jest as well. And thank you for answering the question of the aliens. Yeah, I feel kind of offended, but okay. That's cool. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Let's Talk. We spoke about the Space Force. We got to know a little bit more about the Space Force, what it does, what it is, where it is now, and what the future could hold for it. Is it worth it? I think so. I think in our day and age right now, after what Chris said, it's definitely worth investing in for the future and the protection. It does still makes me wonder, what does the U.S. government know that we don't? Why now? And all that. But unfortunately, we might not get our answer right now. We may only get it in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years from now, when we have a Captain Kirk in space discovering
Yeah.
everything and reliving Star Trek in real life. I don't know, but we'll see. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back with Chris Wyatt hopefully next week, and we'll talk a bit about 9/11. That's going to be a very interesting topic to talk about with a colonel that's been in the United States Army for 36 years. He has a lot of insight. Now, again, he might not be able to talk about everything that I ask him, but we'll definitely have a very interesting talk. So anybody who's interested in 9/11, join us for that one. Chris, once again, thank you so much for your time. I know you got to go to another show, but thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to our next chat.
But it's my pleasure, Joe. Looking forward to the next one. Absolutely. Happy to spend time on here today. It was a lot of fun. And I hope that folks tune into your stream afterwards and enjoy it. They can't ask questions, but at least they can listen to what we talked about.
Yeah, which reminds me, I am having another show at 8:30 with Venner Weber. We're going to talk about hashtag I am the we part 2, where we are going to dissect a bit the local media and its agenda here in South Africa. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, if I don't see you at 8:30, I'll see you at the next one. Good night, stay safe, and I'll see you at the next one.